Iran's greatest advantage had suddenly transformed into its greatest weakness. For decades, the Iranian regime believed the mountains themselves would shield the country from destruction. Deep beneath deserts and rocky mountain ranges, they carved enormous tunnel systems stretching for hundreds of kilometers. These underground cities were filled with missiles, launch vehicles, command centers, ammunition depots, fuel storage areas, and elite Revolutionary Guard units waiting for the day war would arrive. The regime proudly showed these hidden facilities on television broadcasts for years. Cameras moved slowly through endless underground corridors lined with ballistic missiles. Carrying threatening slogans directed at America and Israel, Iranian generals constantly repeated the same message to the world. No enemy, no matter how powerful, could destroy Iran's missile cities because they were buried too deep beneath the mountains. Iran spent nearly 40 years preparing for this exact moment. Engineers reinforced tunnel walls with layers of concrete and steel, while military planners expanded the underground networks deeper into the earth every year. Some facilities were reportedly buried 80 or even 90 meters underground. The deeper the bases became, the more confident the regime grew that it had built an untouchable shield against invasion and airstrikes. The entire strategy depended on one simple belief. If war ever broke out, Iran's missiles would survive safely underground while enemy aircraft bombed the surface above. When the time came, launch platforms would emerge from hidden tunnel entrances, fire ballistic missiles toward enemy targets, and then disappear underground again before retaliation could strike back. Tehran believed this system guaranteed survival even during a long regional war. Iranian commanders openly told their population to prepare for a conflict that could last 5 years if necessary. They believed time was on their side because the underground cities would preserve their military strength long after surface infrastructure was destroyed. State television described these facilities as fortresses of resistance, capable of surviving even the strongest American bunker-busting bombs. For years, many military analysts believed Iran might actually be right. Western intelligence agencies acknowledged that Iran possessed one of the world's most extensive underground missile networks. Reports estimated the country had between 20 and 30 major underground missile bases spread across different provinces. Satellite imagery revealed hidden tunnel entrances disappearing into mountainsides, entire military road systems leading underground, and massive support complexes hidden beneath remote terrain far from population centers. But beneath all that confidence was a fatal weakness the regime failed to fully understand until it was too late. Underground cities are only useful as long as they remain connected to the surface world. Missiles still need launch pads. Troops still need ventilation systems, electricity, fuel lines, communication networks, and operational tunnel entrances. Once those systems are disrupted simultaneously, underground shelters begin transforming into giant underground traps. Everything changed on February 28, 2026. That was the day the air campaign began, and within hours the entire equation of Iran's underground doctrine collapsed into chaos. The strikes were not symbolic attacks or limited retaliatory operations. This was a coordinated campaign specifically designed to dismantle Iran's military infrastructure piece by piece while trapping critical elements of the army beneath the mountains they once trusted for protection. The opening hours alone shocked military observers around the world. The United States deployed multiple strategic bomber platforms simultaneously in one of the most aggressive aerial operations seen in the region for decades. B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, B-1 Lancer supersonic bombers, and B-52 Stratofortress heavy bombers all entered the operation together. Using all three strategic bomber platforms at the same time sent a terrifying message to Tehran. The B-2 Spirit stealth bomber became the centerpiece of the campaign because it carried the most feared weapon in the American arsenal. The GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator weighed 30,000 pounds and was specifically designed to destroy hardened underground targets. Iran had spent decades digging deeper into mountains, believing depth itself guaranteed safety. Instead, the deeper they dug, the larger and more destructive the bunker-busting bombs became. At the same time, B-52 bombers launched massive waves of precision-guided JDAM munitions against surface infrastructure surrounding underground facilities, tunnel entrances, support buildings, ventilation shafts, radar stations, electrical systems, fuel depots, communication hubs, and access roads were systematically targeted. The objective was not only to destroy missiles. The goal was to disconnect entire underground military ecosystems from the outside world permanently. The operation unfolded in carefully coordinated phases designed to maximize pressure on Iran's military network. First came the surveillance stage. American and Israeli drones began circling continuously above known missile regions, while reconnaissance aircraft monitored every sign of movement around tunnel entrances. The skies over critical military areas became saturated with surveillance systems operating 24 hours a day without interruption. The second phase was even more devastating for the Iranian military. Any movement detected near underground facilities triggered immediate strikes within minutes. Missile launchers attempting to emerge from tunnels became instant targets. Vehicles carrying fuel or ammunition were tracked and attacked before reaching operational positions. Every launch ramp that surfaced risked destruction almost immediately under constant aerial surveillance. Iranian commanders had prepared for missile exchanges and retaliatory strikes, but they had not prepared for permanent air dominance, combined with non-stop precision attacks against every operational movement. Once the operation intensified, the underground missile cities stopped functioning as flexible military systems and slowly became isolated, chambers trapped beneath collapsing infrastructure. What Tehran considered its strongest shield was beginning to suffocate its own forces underground. One of the clearest examples emerged near missile facilities outside Isfahan. Satellite imagery later revealed a mobile launch platform attempting to move along a roadway connected to an underground complex. Nearby craters showed that an earlier strike had narrowly missed the vehicle, and the next day the entire area surrounding the tunnel entrances was heavily bombed again, burying sections of the facility beneath collapsed rock and debris. The same pattern repeated itself across the country. Kermanshah, Shiraz, Tabriz, Kerimabad, Hormuz province, and multiple other strategic missile regions suffered continuous bombardment targeting entrances, launch areas, and support infrastructure. Canyon systems surrounding underground launch facilities erupted into massive secondary explosions as missiles and fuel reserves detonated underground. Satellite photographs showed burning launch ramps, collapsed buildings, shattered roads, and destroyed military infrastructure. One of the most catastrophic developments for Tehran was the rapid collapse of its air defense systems. Iranian planners believed their radar networks and missile batteries would at least slow enemy aircraft enough to preserve underground launch capabilities. Instead, many air defense sites were neutralized during the early stages of the campaign. Once those systems failed, enemy aircraft gained almost unrestricted freedom to patrol above critical missile regions. From that moment onward, every movement from underground became extraordinarily dangerous. Missile launchers could no longer safely emerge because drones and surveillance aircraft constantly monitored tunnel exits. Every vehicle leaving a hidden facility risked immediate detection. Every repair crew trying to clear debris or restore infrastructure became vulnerable to precision airstrikes within minutes of appearing on the surface. Inside the underground facilities, panic reportedly spread rapidly. Thousands of Revolutionary Guard personnel suddenly found themselves trapped beneath mountains with damaged communication systems and uncertain access to the outside world. Ventilation systems in some complexes were reportedly compromised, while supply routes carrying food, water, fuel, and medical equipment were severed by repeated bombardments targeting roads and tunnel entrances. Military analysts estimated that between 200,000 and 300,000 personnel could be deployed across Iran's underground military infrastructure. These included missile operators, engineers, logistics staff, air defense teams, technicians, and elite Revolutionary Guard units responsible for operating ballistic missile systems. Considering Iran's total military manpower was estimated at around 960,000 personnel, the implications were staggering. Nearly one-third of the military risked becoming trapped underground. The psychological effect inside the tunnels became devastating. For years, these underground cities had been described as symbols of national survival and military invincibility. Soldiers stationed there were told they would survive any enemy attack while the surface above burned. Instead, many personnel now feared they might never safely leave the tunnels again as explosions echoed through mountain ranges and entrances collapsed under repeated strikes. These facilities were never designed for permanent isolation under continuous bombardment. Ventilation shafts required access to the surface. Fuel generators needed maintenance and resupply. Water systems, electricity, medical facilities, and communications infrastructure all depended on operational surface connections. As entrances collapsed and surrounding infrastructure was destroyed, the underground systems became increasingly disconnected from the battlefield outside. The longer the operation continued, the more terrifying conditions became for personnel trapped underground. Every explosion raised fears that another tunnel section had collapsed nearby. Communication blackouts created uncertainty about whether neighboring units remained operational or had already been destroyed. The sense of isolation deepened hour by hour as underground soldiers realized they were losing contact with the outside world. Iran's leadership had prepared for a long war of attrition lasting years, but the speed of the operation completely shattered those assumptions. The regime expected enough time to relocate equipment, repair damaged facilities, and continue rotating missile systems between underground complexes instead. Major elements of the missile infrastructure were neutralized within days before meaningful recovery operations could even begin. Reports soon indicated a dramatic decline in missile launch activity after the first stages of the campaign. Some estimates claimed missile launches dropped by as much as 86% within only 4 days. This collapse reflected the reality that underground launch systems were being disabled far faster than Iranian forces could restore them. Missiles hidden underground became increasingly useless if launch platforms could no longer safely emerge. Military experts analyzing the strikes noted that repeated attack waves were especially destructive because each wave compounded previous damage. One strike might partially damage a tunnel entrance, while another collapsed surrounding roads and support structures. Later attacks then targeted repair crews, supply convoys, and secondary exits identified through aerial surveillance. Over time, entire facilities lost operational functionality layer by layer. The destruction spread far beyond missile bases alone. Drone facilities, airfields, naval installations, and ammunition depots also suffered heavy strikes. Satellite images revealed shattered aircraft, shelters, collapsed hangars, burning storage areas, and destroyed military compounds. In several locations, secondary explosions continued for hours after the original attacks, confirming that large quantities of ammunition and fuel reserves had detonated underground. One particularly critical target category involved Iran's missile production facilities. Airstrikes reportedly damaged infrastructure linked to ballistic missile manufacturing and storage. This was strategically important because it threatened not only existing missile inventories, but also Iran's future ability to replace losses. Destroying launch systems is damaging. Destroying the industrial infrastructure needed to rebuild them is even more devastating. Nuclear facilities also entered the spotlight during the operation. Reports confirmed damage to entrances and support structures connected to enrichment sites. Although officials insisted radiological contamination remained limited, the objective appeared clear. The campaign aimed not only to delay Iran's nuclear capabilities temporarily, but to permanently degrade the infrastructure, supporting future nuclear development and missile integration programs. The broader strategic objective gradually became undeniable. This operation was not simply about retaliation or limited military punishment. It was an attempt to dismantle the entire underground military doctrine Iran had spent 40 years constructing. Tehran's entire survival strategy depended on underground survivability. But once those underground systems became vulnerable, the foundation of that strategy began collapsing rapidly. Another major weakness soon emerged inside Iran's command structure. The regime had attempted to decentralize missile launch authority to prevent the loss of senior commanders from crippling operations. Local units theoretically possessed independent launch authority if central command systems failed. But decentralization became meaningless once physical launch infrastructure itself was destroyed or inaccessible. Beneath collapsed tunnel systems, missile crews underground might still technically possess launch authority. But without functioning launch ramps, communications systems, transportation networks, and safe exits, that authority became practically useless. The weapons still existed physically underground, but operationally they were becoming irrelevant because the systems required to use them effectively were collapsing around them. Meanwhile, military forces remaining above ground faced their own rapidly deteriorating situation. Air defense coverage weakened dramatically in several regions. Supply lines came under continuous pressure from airstrikes targeting roads, fuel depots, and transportation infrastructure. Communications between units became increasingly unreliable, as command systems and support facilities suffered repeated attacks from the air. On paper, Iran still possessed hundreds of thousands of military personnel. In practice, coordination across large sections of the armed forces was deteriorating rapidly. An army without secure logistics, reliable communications, functioning transportation systems, or effective air defense struggles to maintain organized operations, regardless of how many soldiers remain alive on paper. American intelligence capabilities played a decisive role throughout the campaign. Commercial satellite companies combined with military reconnaissance systems provided continuous visibility over strategic regions. Tunnel entrances, support roads, vehicle movements, communication sites, and supply depots were tracked almost in real time. Every movement above ground risked immediate exposure to surveillance systems operating around the clock. Signal intelligence and cyber operations reportedly supported aerial surveillance by identifying communication activity around underground facilities. Any indication that launch systems might become operational often triggered rapid strikes before missiles could even be prepared for launch. Iran's underground doctrine depended on secrecy and mobility. But under non-stop surveillance, both advantages steadily disappeared. Military analysts describe the situation using one powerful phrase: the hunter had become the hunted. For decades, Iran built underground missile systems specifically to survive superior enemy air power. But by concentrating so much military infrastructure beneath fixed locations underground, Tehran created predictable targets, vulnerable to isolation and repeated precision bombardment once enemy aircraft gained air superiority. The psychological impact inside Iran was enormous. State propaganda had spent years presenting missile cities as untouchable symbols of resistance, capable of surviving any attack. Television broadcasts showed endless underground missile corridors while commanders promised devastating retaliation against foreign enemies. Now those same underground fortresses were increasingly described internationally as giant, underground death traps sealing personnel beneath collapsing mountains. Public confidence inside the country reportedly began eroding as satellite images showing damaged facilities spread worldwide. Destroyed entrances, burning launch zones, shattered roads, and collapsed infrastructure contradicted years of official claims that Iran's underground military network was invulnerable. The contrast between propaganda and reality became impossible to ignore as the operation continued expanding. The campaign also forced military planners worldwide to reconsider assumptions about underground warfare. Many countries previously viewed hardened underground systems as highly effective protection against air campaign. But the strikes demonstrated that modern surveillance, combined with precision bunker-busting weapons, can transform underground infrastructure into isolated targets, vulnerable to operational paralysis, even when facilities physically survive initial bombardment. Modern warfare increasingly focuses not only on destroying structures directly, but on isolating entire systems until they become useless operationally. Tunnel complexes may survive physically beneath mountains, but if entrances collapse, support systems fail, and movement becomes impossible under constant surveillance. The military value of those facilities eventually disappears regardless of how deep they are buried. Iran's missile city doctrine depended completely on mobility and concealment. Launch systems were supposed to emerge briefly, fire rapidly, and disappear underground again before retaliation arrived. But against non-stop surveillance, drones, and rapid precision strikes, that operational cycle became almost impossible to sustain safely for any meaningful period of time. As more facilities suffered repeated attacks, the sense of strategic paralysis inside Iran deepened. Missiles hidden underground could not influence the battlefield if using them meant immediate destruction of launch infrastructure and surrounding personnel. The underground cities remained full of weapons, but increasingly lacked the ability to deploy them effectively against enemy forces. The cruelest irony of the entire operation became impossible to ignore. Iran spent 40 years digging into mountains to avoid destruction from superior air power. But by concentrating so much of its military capability underground, it created fixed systems vulnerable to isolation and collapse once modern bunker-busting technology, air superiority, and continuous surveillance were unleashed against them simultaneously. The mountains that once symbolized protection were now symbols of entrapment. Tunnel networks, once celebrated as instruments of survival, became underground prisons for thousands of personnel trapped beneath collapsed entrances. Missile cities, once presented as guarantees of resistance, were increasingly described as underground graves. And perhaps most terrifying for Tehran, the operation was still continuing.